She collapsed on a desolate stage, her ballet theater dying, her dreams shattering. Then, a dark figure emerged from the shadows, watching her pain with chilling interest. He was Lorenzo Rossi, the city's ruthless mafia boss, and he didn't just save her failing theater, he claimed her. But in his dangerous embrace, was she truly saved, or merely trapped in a gilded cage? The air in the velvet curtain was a tapestry woven from decades of dreams and dust. It smelled of ancient wood polish, mothballed velvet, and the ghost of 1,000 standing ovations. Tonight, however, it carried a heavier scent, despair. Alara Vance inhaled it deeply, a familiar acrid tang that clung to the back of her throat. Each breath was a struggle, much like every step she took on the vast, darkened stage. A single work light, perched precariously on a stand, cast a lonely, unforgiving circle around her. In its harsh glow, the peeling gold leaf on the proscenium arch looked less like faded grandeur and more like a weeping wound. The theater, her inheritance, her sanctuary, was dying. And she, Alara, was slowly dying with it. Her body, usually a symphony of controlled grace, felt like a discordant instrument. Every muscle screamed, a dull, persistent ache that settled deep in her bones. She pushed through it, just as she pushed through the gnawing hunger in her stomach and the heavy dread in her chest. Tonight was for rehearsal, a frantic, desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control through the only language she truly understood, dance. The music, a melancholic piano piece from an old recording, filled the cavernous space. It was a pas de deux. Though she danced it alone, the phantom weight of a partner a cruel reminder of her isolation. Her movements were sharp, precise, yet imbued with a raw, almost violent emotion. A story of struggle and loss, a mirroring of her own life. She spun, landed, then launched into a series of fouettes, each turn a desperate prayer against the inevitable. This theater, she thought, her breath rasping, it's all that's left. A chilling truth. Her grandmother, the formidable prima ballerina who had built the velvet curtain into a beacon of artistic excellence, had left it to Alara with a legacy of passion, not wealth. Now, passion alone couldn't stem the tide of ruin. Her uncle Silas Vance, a man whose smile held the predatory gleam of a shark, was circling. He craved the prime Manhattan real estate, not the history, not the art. He saw only dollar signs where Alara saw soul. The fabricated debt, a monstrous, ever-growing shadow, was Silas's insidious handiwork. Every week, a new, baffling invoice arrived, a notice for overdue taxes, a legal document hinting at foreclosure. Alara had tried. God, how she had tried. She'd scoured ledgers, pleaded with lawyers, even picked up odd jobs at a local cafe, her dancers' hands, once destined for ballet's delicate expressions, now stained with coffee grounds. But it was never enough. The holes Silas dug were too deep, too cunning. A tremor ran through her left knee, a familiar protest from an old enemy. 5 years ago, it had been a devastating snap, a sound like dry branches breaking, echoing through a pristine rehearsal studio. That moment had shattered her promising career, stolen her scholarships, and left her with a permanent, dull throb that flared whenever she pushed too hard. It was a constant reminder of how quickly dreams could turn to dust, how fragile a body could be. Now, dancing on fumes, pushing her aging injury, felt like a dangerous flirtation with complete self-destruction. She remembered her grandmother's words, whispered just before she passed, "Keep the magic alive, Alara. It's in your blood. The magic." How could she keep it alive when the very walls were crumbling around her? When the funding for the new ballet, her magnum opus, her desperate plea for salvation, was a rapidly depleting mirage. Loneliness was a cold, constant companion in the velvet curtain. Her few remaining staff, loyal but dwindling, left promptly at 6. The vast, empty seats of the auditorium seemed to mock her, silent witnesses to her nightly struggle. She had no one to confide in, no one to share the suffocating burden. Each evening, as the city outside hummed with vibrant, indifferent life, Alara retreated deeper into her decaying sanctuary, a queen in a collapsing kingdom. Just last week, she found it. Tucked beneath the dusty costume rack in the wardrobe room, a small, crudely scrawled note, "Tick-tock, ballerina. The show's almost over." It wasn't just a threat. It was a personal jab, a cruel reminder that Silas knew how deeply intertwined her identity was with this place. He wasn't just after the building. He was after her. He wanted to break her spirit, to see her dance on the grave of her dreams. A sudden draft swept through the stage, raising goosebumps on her arms. The theater seemed to breathe around her, a living entity groaning under its own weight. She finished the sequence, a final, despairing flourish, then dropped to the worn floor, gasping for air. Her ankle throbbed with a dull ache, a rhythmic pulse against the frantic beat of her heart. She lay there for a long moment, staring up into the vast, shadowy fly space above, where ropes and pulleys hung like forgotten skeletons. The enormity of her situation pressed down on her, a physical weight. The curtain would fall soon, not for a performance, but for good. And with it, everything Alara Vance believed in would be extinguished. She was at the bottom of the abyss, her last hope as fragile as a silken thread. But tonight, as the chill deepened and the silence settled, she wouldn't have to face it alone. A flicker of movement caught her eye, high up in a VIP box, a place reserved for those of immense privilege. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, detached itself from the ornate velvet. Alara's heart seized. She wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, the fear wasn't just for her theater, but for herself. The searing pain bloomed in Alara's left ankle with the brutal efficiency of a surgeon's blade. It was a familiar fire, a betrayal from within, echoing the devastating snap from years ago. This time, there was no audience to witness her downfall, no sympathetic gasps, only the cold, unforgiving planks of the stage digging into her hip. She clamped her teeth shut, a gasp tearing at her throat, refusing to give voice to the agony. A single tear, born of frustration and physical torment, traced a hot path down her temple, dampening the dusty floorboards beneath her cheek. She lay there, a broken doll discarded in the lonely spotlight, the melancholic piano still playing its mournful tune in the echoing silence of the theater. Every breath was a shallow, painful effort. Her vision swam, blurred by the intense throbbing that radiated from her ankle, up her shin, and into her very soul. No, not again. The silent plea was a desperate whimper in the vast expanse. She couldn't lose it all, not now. The velvet curtain, her grandmother's legacy, her own tenuous grasp on purpose, it was all hanging by this frayed, agonizing thread. Then the music abruptly cut off. A chilling silence descended, heavier than the dust motes dancing in the worklight. Alara's breath hitched. She wasn't alone. High above, in the gilded shadows of the private VIP box, a figure detached itself from the deeper gloom. Even from her prone position, Alara felt the weight of his gaze. It was a predator's assessment, cold and absolute. She tried to push herself up, a futile effort that sent another spike of pain through her. Her muscles screamed in protest, refusing to obey. The stage, her sanctuary, had become her prison. The figure moved, not with urgency, but with a terrifying, deliberate grace. The rustle of expensive fabric, the faint, rhythmic click of Italian leather on the ornate staircase. Each sound was amplified in the hushed theater, a drumbeat of impending confrontation. Alara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Who is he? He emerged from the deeper shadows of the stairwell, stepping into the periphery of the worklight. Lorenzo Enzo Rossi. The name was whispered in hushed tones across Manhattan, a moniker synonymous with power, ruthlessness, and an empire built in the dark. He wasn't a ghost, but a very real, very dangerous man. He was impeccably dressed, a dark, perfectly tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. No flashy gold, no garish excess. His power wasn't advertised, it simply was. His hair, dark and slicked back, caught the faint glow, his features sharp, chiseled, almost aristocratic. But there was nothing gentle in his eyes the color of polished obsidian, deep and utterly unreadable, yet holding an intense, almost unsettling focus as they landed on her. He exuded an aura so potent, so inherently dangerous. It felt like a physical force. It stole the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping not just from pain, but from sheer terror. You're making quite a spectacle, ballerina. His voice was a low rumble, smooth as aged scotch, yet with an underlying edge of steel. It was quiet, but it filled the vast space, carrying an unquestionable authority. Alara flinched. Shame, hot and unwelcome, flooded her cheeks. She, Alara Vance, reduced to a pathetic heap on her own stage, bleeding and vulnerable, under the scrutiny of a man who moved like a king in shadows. She tried to gather her scattered dignity. I'm fine, she managed, her voice a reedy whisper, betraying the lie. She hated the weakness, the tremor in her words. She hated being seen like this. Enzo took another step, then another, until he stood just outside the circle of light, a silent, imposing monolith. The faint scent of expensive cologne, something dark, woody, and utterly masculine, reached her, a stark contrast to the dust and sweat clinging to her. "Fine," he repeated, the single word dripping with disbelief. "You bleed like a sacrifice on an altar, and you call that fine?" He bent, not to help her, but to observe, his gaze piercing. It wasn't dismissive, it was analytical. As if she were a puzzle he was intent on solving. His eyes flickered to her exposed knee, where a vivid crimson stain was spreading across the delicate fabric of her tights, seeping into the rough wood beneath. With a fluid movement, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a pristine white handkerchief, folded with almost obsessive precision. It was fine linen, impossibly soft. He knelt, not quite touching her, but close enough for her to feel the radiated warmth of his body. He pressed the handkerchief gently, firmly, against her wound. A jolt shot through Alara. His touch was impersonal, yet utterly intimate. It was an invasion of her space, a stark reminder of her helplessness. Her muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at her to recoil, to push him away. But she couldn't. The pain held her captive, and his touch, despite its jarring intrusion, offered a strange, unexpected flicker of relief, stemming the flow of blood. "Your knee is bleeding, ballerina," he murmured, his voice closer now, a low thrum against the vast silence. "You perform like you're fighting for your life." It wasn't a question, but an observation, sharp, accurate, and chillingly perceptive. Alara stared at him, her emerald eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a reluctant curiosity. His presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating, yet for a fleeting, dangerous second, she felt a sliver of safety she hadn't experienced in months. This man, radiating danger, had just tended to her wound. It was a paradox that twisted her mind. Who are you?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a breath. A ghost of a smile, cold and knowing, touched the corners of his lips. "Someone who appreciates a struggle, Alara Vance." He already knew her name. The realization sent a fresh wave of unease through her. He rose, a movement so effortless it felt almost supernatural. The handkerchief, now stained crimson, remained pressed to her knee. "You need a doctor," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. He pulled out a sleek, black phone, an older model, no visible cameras, yet radiating a sense of absolute security. With a single decisive flick of his wrist, he opened it. "My doctor." Before Alara could protest, before she could even process the implication of his doctor, a sharp, commanding voice, imbued with an unshakable authority, issued through the theater. "Tony, Franco, get down here and clear the house. Now." The chilling implication settled over her like a shroud. He hadn't just been alone. He had men. Men he could summon with a single word. Men who were undoubtedly as dangerous, as formidable as he was. Her fear, momentarily eclipsed by the strange intimacy of his touch, surged back, stronger than ever. She was no longer just a struggling artist in a dying theater. She was a vulnerable creature caught in the watchful, dangerous gaze of a serpent, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life was about to irrevocably change. The immediate aftermath of Enzo Rossi's pronouncement was a blur of controlled chaos. Two hulking men, silent and formidable, materialized from the shadows of the main entrance, their presence a chilling promise of swift, unquestioning obedience. Alara, still sprawled on the stage, felt the cool, sterile touch of a stranger's hands on her injured ankle. Enzo's doctor was a lean, precise man with eyes that saw too much and spoke too little. He worked with an unsettling efficiency, his every movement a stark contrast to the frantic, artistic energy that usually filled these halls. Alara watched through a haze of pain as he expertly bandaged her ankle, the scent of antiseptic cutting through the musty theater air. Enzo remained a dark, silent sentinel, observing every flinch, every ragged breath Alara took. His gaze was unervingly intense, making her skin prickle. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her vulnerabilities laid bare. When the doctor finished, he simply nodded to Enzo, then melted back into the shadows with his silent companions, leaving Alara alone once more with the terrifying dawn. "You need rest," Enzo's voice cut through the stillness. It wasn't a suggestion. "And protection. Your uncle is a fool, but even fools can cause damage." Alara tried to push herself up to regain some semblance of control, but a sharp stab of pain pinned her back down. Frustration, hot and bitter, welled up. "I don't need your protection," she snapped, the words weak but fierce. I don't need anything from you. Enzo merely raised a dark, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A flicker of something, amusement or disdain, crossed his obsidian eyes. Don't you, ballerina? Your ankle begs to differ. Your decaying theater whispers its impending doom. And those little notes, the accident. He paused, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. They speak of a much larger, more pressing need. He knew. He knew everything. The realization chilled her to the bone. He then extended a hand, not for her to take, but simply open, palm up. The velvet curtain is bleeding, Alara. I can stop the flow. I can stitch it back together. But my terms are absolute. Her mind raced, a frantic torrent of despair and desperate calculations. Silas's threats were escalating daily. Just yesterday, she found a notice from the city, demanding immediate structural repairs she couldn't afford. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Her meager savings were gone. Her last loyal stagehand had quit, too terrified to stay after a misunderstanding with some of Silas's enforcers. She was at the end of her rope, dangling over an abyss. A monster in a perfectly tailored suit was offering her a lifeline. A dangerous, venomous lifeline. The metallic tang of her own blood, still on the floor where she'd fallen, seemed to mock her. What were your terms? She whispered, the question tasting like ash. Full control. Of the finances, the security, the strategic direction. His eyes bored into hers, unwavering. The velvet curtain will be my venture. You, he added, his gaze dropping to her bandaged ankle, then rising slowly to meet her eyes again, will be its artist. Nothing more. Nothing less. The implication was clear. She would dance to his tune. She would exist within his carefully constructed world. A wave of resentment, sharp and bitter, washed over her. Her artistic integrity, her grandmother's legacy, they were being bought, sold, consumed by this man. But what choice did she have? The alternative was total annihilation. The velvet curtain would fall, swallowed by Silas's greedy maw, and with it, every last shred of Alara's identity. Fine, she breathed, the single word of surrender, a death knell to her independence. But the art, the ballast, they are mine. Uncompromised. Enzo's lips curved into a thin, predatory smile. A small concession. For now. The next morning, the patronage began. Not with a subtle injection of funds, but with a statement. A full-scale, almost military-like operation. Lorries rumbled down the cobblestone alley behind the theater, disgorging crates of equipment, furniture, and a steady stream of silent, efficient men. They moved with a disturbing synchronicity, transforming the rarely used administrative wing adjacent to the theater into a luxurious, almost fortress-like residence. Alara watched from the gaping stage door, a cup of lukewarm tea clutched in her trembling hands. The scent of fresh paint, polished wood, and something distinctly masculine, Enzo's cologne, impossibly, now permeated the air, overwhelming the familiar smells of dust and decay. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just patronage. It was an invasion. The suite Enzo claimed for himself was opulent, jarringly out of place within the crumbling grandeur of the theater. Dark mahogany, Italian leather, sleek, minimalist lines against the theater's ornate, turn-of-the-century aesthetic. It was a visual representation of his territorial claim, a stark reminder of who was truly in charge. His presence was a palpable weight, a constant pressure. Their first clash came within days. Alara was rehearsing with a few remaining dancers, trying to bring life back to her new piece, when Enzo's security team installed new, intimidating metal detectors at every entrance. The incessant beeping, the heavy footsteps, the cold, uniformed presence, it shattered the delicate artistic atmosphere. This is impossible. Alara stormed into Enzo's temporary office, a makeshift space that already reeked of his authority. My dancers are distracted. This isn't a federal building. It's a place of art. Enzo leaned back in his plush leather chair, a pristine white shirt stretched taut across his broad shoulders. He hadn't bothered with a jacket. His gaze was calm, infuriatingly so. This is a place that was vulnerable, exposed. Now, it is secure, but it's intrusive. It's stifling creativity. She threw her hands up in exasperation. We can't have armed guards at every performance, scaring off the few patrons we have left. On the contrary, he said, his voice smooth as silk, yet with an iron core. When the threat to your life, and indeed to my investment, is eliminated, patrons will return. They desire security, Alara. Just as you do. His words struck a raw nerve. She did desire security. Desperately. But at what cost? She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the sheer force of his controlled power pinned her in place. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His quiet authority was far more terrifying. Yet, despite her resentment, the changes began to work. The leaking roof was repaired with astonishing speed and precision. The stage lights, old and unreliable, were replaced with state-of-the-art equipment. The long-standing debts, the fabricated invoices from Silas, mysteriously vanished. Or rather, they were handled. Alara didn't ask how. She didn't want to know. The relief was a dangerous drug, seeping into her exhausted bones. She could finally breathe. She could focus on her choreography, on her dancers, without the constant, suffocating fear of imminent collapse. The theater, once a symbol of her agonizing struggle, was slowly, undeniably, stabilizing. But with every repair, every resolved crisis, she felt the invisible chains tighten. She was no longer running the velvet curtain. Enzo was. She was merely its beautiful, talented, utterly dependent figurehead. She was a bird in a gilded cage, her wings clipped by a man who saw her artistic soul as both a treasure to be protected and a possession to be claimed. One evening, after the last of Enzo's men had patrolled their perimeter checks, Alara stood alone on the now brightly lit stage. The newly installed sound system hummed with a pristine clarity she hadn't heard in years. The air was cleaner, safer. She tried a delicate arabesque, her ankle protesting faintly but not screaming. A sliver of hope, fragile and dangerous, bloomed in her chest. But then her eyes drifted to the VIP box, where Enzo often sat, a silent observer in the shadows. She imagined his dark, piercing gaze, always watching. She had saved her theater, but she had lost something else in the process. Her freedom. Her autonomy. And she wondered, with a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill in the air, the price she would truly pay for this dangerous patronage. She was a puppet on his strings, and the show, she realized, was just beginning. The scent of espresso and warm Italian pastries now mingled with the familiar dust and aged wood of the velvet curtain. It was an unwelcome, luxurious intrusion, a daily reminder of Enzo Rossi's omnipresent hand. Alara found him most mornings in what was once the meager administrative office, now transformed into a command center that hummed with a quiet, lethal efficiency. He would be seated behind a vast mahogany desk, a strong black coffee steaming beside him, his gaze already locked onto a tablet filled with numbers and reports she couldn't comprehend. His presence was a stark, almost jarring contrast to the delicate morning light filtering through the grime-streaked windows. Initially, Alara had tried to avoid him. She'd slip onto the stage before dawn, seeking the solace of the empty theater, hoping to lose herself in her choreography before his world intruded. But he was always there, a dark shadow woven into the fabric of her new reality. Sometimes she would feel his eyes on her from the VIP box during rehearsal, a prickling sensation on her skin. She wouldn't look up, refusing to acknowledge the silent scrutiny, but the awareness of his gaze was a constant, unsettling hum beneath her skin. It was invasive, yet strangely, it also made her feel seen. One particularly grueling afternoon, Alara wrestled with a complex lift. Her ankle still ached, a ghost limb protesting against the demands she placed on it. Her lead dancer, a young man named Leo, struggled with the timing, his frustration mounting. Alara felt the familiar burn of despair. They were behind schedule, understaffed and stretched thin. She sank onto the stage apron, burying her face in her hands. A moment later, a quiet voice, devoid of judgment, broke through her exhaustion. Perhaps a different counterweight is needed. Alara looked up, startled. Enzo stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, a pristine white shirt stretched across his powerful chest. He had a technician with him, a wiry man who nodded deferentially to Enzo, then began calmly adjusting a complex pulley system above the stage. Within minutes, the lift became smoother, more manageable. Enzo hadn't offered advice, he'd offered a solution, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who solved problems, not debated them. A small, insidious crack formed in Alara's defenses. She hated the way he simply knew what she needed, hated the growing ease with which his resources swept away her obstacles. It was an insidious comfort, making her dangerously dependent. He's buying my helplessness, she thought, buying my gratitude. Yet there were other moments, smaller, more subtle. The evening she left her scarf on a chair, chilled by the theater's cavernous spaces, only to find it neatly folded on her dressing room table the next morning, still carrying the faint, woody scent of Enzo's cologne. Or the appearance of a rare first-edition book on Diaghilev's ballets Russes, left anonymously on her desk, a silent acknowledgement of her passion for ballet history. He saw her, truly saw her, in ways no one else had in years. It sparked a dangerous, forbidden curiosity. "You know a lot about counterweights," she found herself saying one evening, finding him still in his office, the city lights painting geometric patterns on the dark glass behind him. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes, dark as midnight, meeting hers. "I know about mechanics, Alara. Whether it's the gears of a city or the pulleys of a theater. Everything operates on leverage." He paused, a long, thoughtful beat. "And you, ballerina, you understand the mechanics of the human spirit. How to make it soar, even when the body screams." The unexpected compliment startled her. It was the first time he'd offered anything resembling artistic insight, and it was unnervingly accurate. He sees that too. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She found herself lingering, drawn by the quiet intensity of his presence. "My grandmother used to say the theater was alive," she murmured, gazing out at the darkened stage, visible through the wide-open office door. "That it breathed with every performance, every dream." Enzo followed her gaze. "And now it feels like it's holding its breath." She hesitated, then, compelled by an urge she didn't understand, continued. "This new ballet, it's about loss, and finding the strength to rebuild, piece by piece." She didn't often speak about her work with such raw honesty, especially not to outsiders, and certainly not to a man like him. He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the stage, as if seeing not just the emptiness, but the ghost of her dreams. "Loss," he finally said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "It can either destroy you, Alara, or it can forge you into something stronger." He looked back at her, a rare, unguarded flicker in his eyes. "You have strength, ballerina. More than you know." The words hung in the air, a delicate bridge forged between them. Alara felt a strange warmth unfurl in her chest, a feeling she hadn't recognized as hope until that moment. He saw her fragility, her despair, but he also saw her resilience, and he admired it. The notion was both terrifying and intoxicating. Their late-night encounters became more frequent. Sometimes he would simply sit and listen as she talked about her choreography, frustrations, her lingering fears. Other times, he would offer cryptic insights into the ruthless world of business and power, a stark contrast to her artistic sensibilities, yet undeniably effective. She found herself drawn to his sharp intellect, his unwavering confidence, even as she battled her inherent distrust. One stormy night, a fierce rain lashed against the theater's ancient windows, rattling the glass. Alara, unable to sleep, found Enzo still working in his office. He looked up, his face etched with a weariness she'd never seen before. A vulnerability that was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Bad weather," he commented, his voice a low murmur against the drumming rain. "I used to love the rain," she confessed, walking to the window, the chill seeping through the old panes. "It felt a cleansing. Now it just feels like more weight." He rose, walking to stand beside her, his proximity a potent force. The faint scent of rain, mixed with his rich cologne, filled her senses. "Weight can be borne," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "if you have the right support." His gaze lingered on her, intense and possessive. She felt a magnetic pull, dangerous current flowing between them. His quiet intensity, the undeniable power he wielded, was both terrifying and arousing. Her breath hitched. What is this? She knew she shouldn't feel it. This dangerous, ruthless man. He was everything she feared, everything she had tried to escape. But with every quiet observation, every subtle gesture of care, every glimpse beneath his impenetrable facade, a reluctant attraction ignited within her. Her heart, once guarded and broken, was beginning to beat a new, unsettling rhythm. She found herself wanting to unravel the lingering mystery of Lorenzo Rossi, even if it meant entangling herself deeper in his dangerous web. And she knew, with a certainty that thrilled and frightened her, that he was watching, waiting, for her to truly acknowledge the masterpiece he was slowly unveiling within her. The fragile peace that had settled over the velvet curtain was shattered with the brutal force of a thrown stone. Alara had deluded herself into believing Enzo's presence alone would be enough to deter Silas, that his shadowy influence would merely keep her uncle at bay. She was devastatingly wrong. Silas, driven by a desperate, cornered rage, escalated his attacks, no longer subtle whispers, but direct, ugly blows aimed at dismantling every last shred of Alara's life. It began with the tabloids. A lurid, fabricated story splashed across a gossip rag, alleging Alara Vance, the tragic ballerina, was squandering her family's legacy on a secret gambling addiction, that her career-ending injury was a result of recklessness fueled by illicit substances. The online forums, usually a haven for ballet enthusiasts, exploded with venomous comments, tearing her reputation to shreds. Alara stared at the headlines, her fingers trembling, the black ink smudging beneath her touch. It wasn't just lies. It was a perversion of her deepest pain, twisting her most vulnerable moments into grotesque caricatures. The shame, hot and suffocating, burned through her. Her dancers, young and idealistic, began to look at her differently. Whispers followed her from the wings, snatches of conversations about bad press and shady dealings. The delicate ecosystem of the theater, painstakingly rebuilt with Enzo's resources, felt suddenly poisoned. Then came the physical threats. Leo, her loyal lead dancer, a young man with a heart as sensitive as his movements, arrived at rehearsal one morning with a bruised jaw and a terrified tremor in his hands. He'd been warned to distance himself from the theater, from Alara. His voice, usually vibrant with artistic passion, was now a strained whisper as he recounted being cornered by two brutish men who spoke Silas's name like a curse. Alara's stomach churned with a sickening mixture of guilt and fury. This wasn't just about her anymore. Silas was reaching for her chosen family, her last remaining allies. The final, most crippling blow came from the city itself. A building inspector, a man who had been nothing but cordial during recent renovations, suddenly reappeared, his face pale and eyes darting nervously. He presented Alara with a lengthy document detailing new, insurmountable violations, outdated wiring, unsafe fire exits, structural weaknesses that would require the theater to be shut down indefinitely. The irony was bitter. All of these issues had been rectified weeks ago, under Enzo's exacting supervision. It was a blatant shakedown, a move so transparent it reeked of bribery and desperation. Alara felt the walls closing in. The legal avenues were choked, her reputation tarnished, her few friends terrorized. She had tried to fight, scrabbling for legal counsel, contacting the few sympathetic reporters she knew, but every door slammed shut in her face. Silas had meticulously woven a web of corruption and intimidation, and Alara, with her artistic spirit and crumbling theater, was hopelessly entangled. Despair, cold and absolute, wrapped around her like a shroud. She found herself in Enzo's office, not asking for help, but simply standing there, staring at the polished mahogany desk, her shoulders slumped, the official shutdown notice crumpled in her hand. The humiliation was a raw wound. She hated needing him, hated the unspoken admission of her helplessness, yet she was beyond pride. Enzo looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. He saw the terror in her eyes, the defeat etched on her face, without her having to utter a single word. He took the crumpled notice from her, smoothing it out with deliberate, unhurried movements. His dark eyes scanned the document, then rose to meet hers. Silas has grown impatient, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying a chilling undertone. A mistake. He made a call, his words a rapid-fire stream of Italian, too quick for Alara to follow. His tone was low, calm, yet held an undeniable edge of command that sent shivers down her spine. He barely spoke above a whisper, but the air in the room seemed to crackle with latent power. He ended the call with a curt nod, then placed the phone back on his desk. The articles, he said, turning his gaze back to Alara, they will disappear. The journalists responsible will find new, less lucrative employment. Or perhaps no employment at all. His voice was flat, a casual statement of absolute power. Alara gasped, a horrified tremor passing through her. You can't just. I can, he interrupted, his eyes hardening. And I will. No one slanders what is mine, Alara. Especially not with pathetic lies. The possessiveness in his tone was a shock, a sudden, brutal declaration of ownership that left her breathless. The next few days were a chilling demonstration of Enzo Rossi's reach. The tabloid articles mysteriously vanished from newsstands and online archives. Websites linked to the smear campaign crashed, replaced by cryptic error messages. The journalists who had penned the pieces were suddenly embroiled in their own scandalous investigations, their careers imploding overnight. Leo, her stagehand, walked into rehearsal a few days later, his face pale, but his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and bewildered relief. He stammered a story about being approached again by Silas's men, but this time they'd been intercepted by other men, larger men, quieter men, men who delivered a stark message, not with violence, but with a chilling, unspoken threat that made Silas's thugs vanish into the night. Leo didn't know who they were, but Alara did. She saw the fear in Leo's eyes, and a wave of moral conflict washed over her. She hated the violence, the intimidation, yet her friend was safe. The building inspector, too, reappeared. He was a shell of his former self, his face gray, his hand shaking as he officially retracted the shutdown notice. He mumbled apologies, citing administrative errors, his eyes wide and terrified, avoiding Alara's gaze entirely. She later overheard one of Enzo's men mention a friendly visit to the inspector's home, heart-to-heart about code violations. The casual brutality of it all made her stomach clench. Enzo, meanwhile, moved through the theater like a silent, dangerous phantom. He would simply know when a problem arose, and before Alara could even fully articulate her fears, it would be gone. His efficiency was terrifying, his methods ruthless, yet undeniably effective. She watched, a horrified spectator, as Silas's carefully constructed web of malice unraveled under Enzo's precise, brutal hand. She should have been disgusted. She was disgusted. The sheer, unadulterated power, the casual disregard for legalities, the implied violence, it was all everything she despised. Yet, paradoxically, as each threat evaporated, a profound, undeniable sense of relief washed over her. She, and more importantly, her theater, were safe. Enzo had created an impenetrable shield around her, a fortress of his making, built on the very principles she abhorred. One evening, after the last of Silas's immediate threats had been decisively neutralized, Alara found Enzo in his office, the cityscape twinkling behind him. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no triumph in his gaze, no arrogance, only a quiet, resolute intensity. Silas has been dealt with, he stated, the words a chilling euphemism for the destruction he had wrought on her uncle's schemes. He will no longer trouble you, or your theater. Alara swallowed hard, her throat dry. What did you do? The question was a desperate plea for reassurance, for an explanation that might soften the edges of the monstrous reality she was witnessing. His gaze held hers, unwavering. I removed the obstacles, Alara. As I said I would. A subtle shift occurred in his eyes, a deepening of their possessive glint. This theater, your art, he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous caress, are mine to protect. No one, absolutely no one, touches what is mine. The words were a brand, searing themselves into her soul. She was horrified by the sheer, unbridled power he wielded, the cold, efficient destruction he had wrought. Yet, in that moment, standing in the silent safety of his office, the city lights shimmering outside like a million distant promises, Alara felt something else bloom in her chest, an unsettling, dangerous, and beneath it all, a profound, almost primal sense of security she hadn't known in years. She was claimed, and terrifyingly, undeniably, she was safe. But at what cost had this safety been purchased? And what, indeed, would this dangerous patron ultimately demand as his price? The aftermath of Silas's brutal neutralization settled over Alara like a chilling mist, clinging to her skin. The tangible relief was immense, a heavy burden lifted from her soul, yet came at a horrifying price. She moved through the newly secured corridors of the velvet curtain as if walking on eggshells, acutely aware of the invisible boundaries Enzo had drawn. Her dancers practiced with a new, uneasy reverence, their whispers silenced by the sheer, undeniable power that now permeated the building. Alara felt safe, undeniably so, but that safety was woven with threads of blood and ruthlessness. She found him late one night in his office, the cityscape outside gleaming like scattered diamonds. Enzo was at his desk, a rare glass of amber liquid in his hand, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. The rich, woody scent of his cologne filled the room, a potent reminder of his presence, his power. "We need to talk," Alara stated, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to keep it steady. She stood a few feet from his desk, refusing to approach closer, trying to project an independence she didn't quite feel. Enzo's head slowly lifted. His dark eyes, usually unreadable, held a subtle, weary glint. He set his glass down with a soft click. "We are talking, Hilara." "No," she countered, her anger finally breaking through her fear. "We're not. You eliminated Silas. You crushed his network. You used methods that defy explanation. My friends were terrorized, careers destroyed. And I stood by, grateful, because it meant my theater was safe." Her voice cracked with the weight of her moral conflict. "How can I stand by that? How can I reconcile this with the art I strive to create?" She gestured wildly around the opulent room, then out towards the dark, silent stage. "You bring darkness into a place of light." Enzo leaned back, his gaze unwavering, almost challenging. "I brought security to a place of vulnerability. I brought survival to a place facing extinction. Do you think Silas would have cared about the art if he'd torn down these walls?" His voice was low, devoid of heat, yet carried an undeniable conviction. "He would have built another glass tower, Hilara, and your dreams would have been buried under concrete. But the way you did it," her voice was a desperate plea. "The fear, the intimidation, the sheer violence of it. Do not see the cost." He rose from his chair then, a slow, deliberate movement that commanded attention. He walked to the vast window, his back to her, silhouetted against the glittering skyline. "Cost." His voice was a rasp, raw and unexpected. "I understand cost, Hilara, better than anyone you will ever meet." The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. Hilara watched his broad shoulders, usually so unyielding, carry a subtle, unfamiliar weight. Curiosity, dangerous and irresistible, warred with her lingering fear. He turned, and for the first time, Hilara saw it, a shadow in his eyes, deeper than any she had witnessed before. A fleeting glimpse of a wound that had never truly healed. "When I was younger," he began, his voice barely above a murmur, "my father tried to go straight, to legitimize. He believed in the honor of our work, the loyalty to our people. But he also believed in a world where good intentions could pave a different path." He paused, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He had a younger sister, Isabella. She was a spirited, full of light, like a dancer, perhaps. He wanted her to have a life away from the shadows, untouched by the family business. Hilara held her breath, captivated by the raw honesty in his voice, a stark contrast to his usual impenetrable facade. "She was kidnapped," Enzo continued, his voice hardening, the shadow deepening in his eyes, "by rivals who saw my father's attempt at legitimacy as weakness. They sent pieces of her back, one by one, to break him, to break us." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the power in them barely restrained. "I was just a boy. I stood there, helpless, watching my father crumble, watching my family destroyed, because he believed in different paths, because he wasn't ruthless enough. He didn't understand that in our world, weakness is a death sentence, and hope, when it's misplaced, is the sharpest blade." The confession hung heavy in the air, a devastating echo of a past trauma that explained so much. His fierce possessiveness, his unwavering need for control, his absolute intolerance for weakness, it was all forged in the crucible of that unspeakable loss. He had experienced the ultimate betrayal of helplessness, and he had vowed never to feel it again. "I tried to protect her," he continued, his gaze now fixed on Hilara, searing through her. "But I was too young, too powerless. When I took over, I swore I would never again allow what is mine to be threatened, to be taken, to be destroyed." Hilara felt a sudden, profound wave of empathy wash over her, dissolving her anger, replacing it with a painful understanding. She, too, knew the crushing weight of helplessness, the trauma of a dream shattered, her own career-ending injury, the slow, agonizing decay of her theater under Silas's hand. It was a different kind of violence, but the same kind of loss. "My ankle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The injury, it wasn't just physical. It destroyed everything. My future, my identity. I felt useless, invisible. And when Silas started closing in on the theater, it was like reliving that helplessness all over again." She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "I know what it's like to lose everything you care about because you're not strong enough to protect it." The shared vulnerability hung between them, a fragile bridge built on broken dreams and haunting pasts. Enzo took a step towards her, then another, until he stood directly in front of her. His hand, large and calloused, reached out, not to grab, but to gently cup her jaw. His touch was firm, possessive, yet held an unexpected tenderness that made her breath catch in her throat. "You are not useless, Alara," he murmured, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbone. "You are not invisible. You have a light that I haven't seen since Isabella. And no one will ever take that from you. Not again. Not while you are mine." The words, "you are mine," should have sent a jolt of alarm through her, a stark reminder of her gilded cage. But in that moment, under the intensity of his gaze, feeling the protective warmth of his touch, Alara felt something else. A tremor of dangerous, undeniable attraction. She realized, with a startling clarity that both thrilled and terrified her, that his ownership had quietly, insidiously, extended beyond the theater, beyond her safety, to the very core of her heart. She was falling irrevocably into his orbit. Her eyes, wide and searching, met his. The desperation, the fear, the loneliness she had carried for so long seemed to recede, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying connection. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. The dark, dangerous dawn, forged in the fires of loss and vengeance, had found something precious to protect, something pure to claim. And Alara, the broken artist, realized she was no longer fighting against his possessive grasp. She was, terrifyingly, leaning into it, understanding, for the first time, the depths of his unwavering desire to protect what he held dear. He sought to possess her wholly, not as a prize, but as a treasure to be guarded fiercely. And a part of her, a deep, primal part she hadn't known existed, yearned for that very claim. The fragile threads of hope Alara had woven around herself began to fray, then snap, one by one. Despite Enzo's iron grip on the city's underbelly, Silas Vance, cornered and desperate, had discovered a new, insidious tactic. He knew Alara's deepest vulnerabilities, the cracks in her armor that Enzo's power couldn't always foresee. He played the long game, patiently tugging at a string Alara never even knew he possessed. It started with an anonymous email. A discreet invitation from a renowned and seemingly legitimate arts foundation proposing a unique collaboration, a grant to fund a new, experimental ballet that would merge classical forms with modern digital artistry. The catch? A private, unannounced meeting at a secluded warehouse studio in the meatpacking district, ostensibly for security reasons and to avoid media leaks. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Alara had dreamed of, a chance to secure the theater's future through legitimate artistic means, far from Enzo's dangerous patronage. Her heart, usually so wary, swelled with a dangerous, intoxicating hope. This was her chance, a way to prove her worth, to validate her art on her own terms. She debated telling Enzo. For days, the email sat in her inbox, a secret she fiercely guarded. The thought of his inevitable skepticism, his possessive desire to control every aspect of her life, chafed against her desperate need for autonomy. This was her fight, her dream. She would go alone. She confided only in Leo, her loyal lead dancer, sketching out the new ballet's vision, the surge of creative energy temporarily eclipsing her unease. He, too, saw the glimmer of hope, though his bruised jaw from Silas's previous threats still throbbed, a silent warning. The afternoon of the meeting, Alara dressed carefully, opting for chic, understated outfit that belied her inner turmoil. She left a vague note for Enzo on her desk, something about artistic engagements, a blatant half-truth that made her stomach churn with guilt. She told herself it was for the best. She couldn't risk him interfering, couldn't risk his dark world contaminating this pristine opportunity. The warehouse studio, nestled amongst the industrial grit of the meatpacking district, seemed unassuming. The large, frosted windows promised privacy, the quiet hum of the city outside a deceptive lull. She pushed open a heavy metal door, its groan echoing in the sudden silence. Inside, the space was vast, cold, and utterly empty. No artistic director. No foundation representatives. Just the chilling expanse of polished concrete and the faint smell of industrial cleaner. A single, exposed bulb hung from the ceiling, casting stark shadows that danced with her rising panic. "Hello." Her voice, usually so clear, was a thin, trembling whisper. The metal door clanged shut behind her, the sound a death knell. A wave of icy terror washed over her, making her legs weak. Trap. The realization was a devastating punch to the gut. Silas. It had to be Silas. From the deeper shadows, a figure emerged. Not Silas, but one of his enforcers, a burly man with cold, dead eyes she recognized from the periphery of past threats. He wasn't alone. Two more men materialized, flanking him, their movements fluid and menacing. Alaravance, the first man, sneered, his voice a low growl. Uncle Silas send his regards. He said you might be receptive to a new kind of performance. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. What do you want? She demanded, forcing courage into her voice, though her hands trembled. You, he replied, a cruel smile twisting his lips. And a message for your patron. She didn't get a chance to fight. A rough hand clamped over her mouth, another grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. The sudden, violent invasion of her personal space sent a jolt of pure terror through her. A thick, chemically laced cloth was pressed over her nose and mouth. The world spun. The scent of chloroform, cloying and sickly sweet, filled her lungs, dragging her into a suffocating darkness. Her last conscious thought was of Enzo, his dark eyes, his possessive words. He warned me, and I ignored him. When Alara woke, consciousness returned in a disorienting haze of pain and cold. Her head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache. Her wrists and ankles were bound with rough rope, biting into her skin. She lay on a cold, damp concrete floor, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere nearby, each drop echoing like a hammer blow in the oppressive silence. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. She was in a small, windowless room, the walls scarred with graffiti and peeling paint. A single dusty vent high on the wall offered the only hint of external connection, but no light. She strained against her bindings, a futile effort that only chafed her skin. Helplessness, absolute and suffocating, wrapped around her. Enzo. Her mind screamed his name. Would he even know she was gone? Would he care? A chilling thought began to take root, twisting in her terror-stricken mind. What if this was part of his plan? His revenge for her challenge, for her fleeting moment of independence? He had shown her the ruthlessness of his world. Had she been naive enough to believe she could ever truly escape its grasp, even with him as her protector? He claimed to protect what was his. Was this a lesson? A demonstration of her utter dependence? The thought sent a fresh wave of despair washing over her, colder than the damp concrete beneath her. Hours blurred into an eternity. Her throat was raw, her body stiff and aching. Footsteps occasionally echoed in a distant corridor, sending jolts of adrenaline through her, but no one came for her. The isolation was maddening, each tick of the dripping water counting down to an unknown, terrifying fate. Meanwhile, back at the velvet curtain, Enzo Rossi was a coiled viper, radiating a terrifying icy calm. Alara's vague note lay on his desk, crumpled now, reflecting the storm brewing in his obsidian eyes. She hadn't been back. His calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. His men, usually so efficient, had no trace. Find her. Enzo's voice was a low growl, barely audible, yet vibrating with a dangerous intensity that made his most hardened enforcers flinch. Scour every corner of this city, every shadow, every rat hole. If a single hair on her head is harmed, I will dismantle this city brick by brick. His usual controlled demeanor had shattered, revealing a raw, furious despair. The realization of how deeply Alara had woven herself into the fabric of his existence, how profoundly he cared for her, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had allowed himself to become vulnerable, to trust in a delicate, fragile thing like hope, and now it was being ripped from him. The echoes of Isabella's loss, the helpless fury of his youth, raged within him. He slammed his fist against the desk, the heavy wood groaning under the impact. His carefully constructed empire, his network of informants, his absolute power, it all felt useless, impotent, against the chilling silence surrounding Alara's disappearance. Silas, he spat, the name a curse. Only Silas would be so brazen, so desperate, so foolish. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Enzo's eyes narrowed. He answered, his voice a low, dangerous command. Speed. Silas's voice, distorted and gleeful, crackled through the line. Looking for your little ballerina, Enzo? She's quite expressive. Ashamed she chose the wrong partner. Enzo's knuckles whitened around the phone. Where is she? He demanded, his voice a lethal whisper that promised agony. Oh, she's safe. For now. But her time is running out. And with every passing moment, she's realizing the true nature of her patron, the darkness she embraced. Silas's laugh was a grating, triumphant sound. You want her back, Dawn. It'll cost you everything. Your theater. Your influence. And a public apology to me. Enzo's breath hitched. He had pushed Alara into his world, had claimed her, believing he could shield her. And now his greatest fear was realized. She was exposed to its brutality, believing he was the cause. The thought that she might see him as her betrayer, rather than her protector, was a more agonizing torment than any physical wound. You won't get a damn thing, Enzo snarled, the icy calm finally fracturing, revealing the volcano of rage beneath. You touch one hair on her head, Silas, and I will make you beg for the death you so carelessly deal. He hung up, the sharp click echoing in the suddenly silent office. He turned to his men, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes burning with an infernal light. Find her. No. Bring her back. And bring me Silas Vance. Alive if you can. But if you can't, just bring me his head. The hunt had begun. And for Alara, bound and terrified in the damp, echoing darkness, the true nightmare was only just beginning to unfold. She was certain of abandonment, convinced of betrayal, unaware that the serpent she feared was about to unleash a storm of unimaginable fury to reclaim what was his. The phone clattered against the opulent mahogany of Enzo's desk, the sharp, hollow sound echoing the chasm of rage tearing through him. Silas's taunting words, his repulsive glee, had ignited a firestorm within Enzo Rossi, a primal fury that obliterated his carefully constructed composure. His breath hitched, a harsh, ragged sound in the suddenly silent office. The cityscape, usually a source of calm power, now blurred into an indifferent, mocking panorama. He had failed. He had promised to protect her, to keep what was his safe, and in a moment of her misguided independence, Silas had plunged his poison blade. Isabella's terrified screams, the unbearable helplessness, clawed at the edges of his sanity. Not again. Never again. Find him. Enzo's voice was a low growl, devoid of any discernible human emotion, yet vibrating with a lethal intensity that sent shivers down the spines of his two closest enforcers, Tony and Marco, who stood rigidly before him. Every resource, every contact. Tear this city apart, brick by brick, until Alara is back. And Silas Vance, bring him to me. Alive if you can. If not, just bring me his head. The order, chilling in its simplicity, was received without question. Within minutes, the velvet curtain transformed from a hushed artistic haven into a humming hive of controlled chaos. Enzo's network, a complex web of loyalty, fear, and information, snapped into motion. Phones buzzed, radios crackled with rapid-fire Italian, cars peeled away from the theater's guarded perimeter, their engines roaring into the night. Every eye, every ear, every illicit connection in Manhattan was now focused on one singular, devastating objective, finding Alara Vance. Enzo didn't wait. He didn't direct from afar. He led. His usual impeccably tailored suit was replaced by practical, dark tactical gear, though the underlying menace remained as palpable as ever. His eyes, usually pools of obsidian calm, now burned with an infernal light, reflecting a singular, murderous intent. He was a force of nature unleashed, a dark god of retribution. Silas has a few hiding places, boss. Tony barked into his earpiece, leading Enzo through the labyrinthine, grimy corridors beneath the city. The air was thick with the stench of stagnant water, rats, and stale concrete, a stark contrast to the theater's fragrant elegance. We picked up a low-level associate trying to skip town. He sang like a canary. Where? Enzo's voice was clipped, impatient. An old meat-packing plant in Hell's Kitchen. Decommissioned. He uses it as a temporary holding cell for sensitive operations. Go. Enzo didn't need to be told twice. He moved with a predatory grace, his footsteps eerily silent against the concrete, his hand instinctively resting on the cold steel of the custom-made Beretta holstered at his hip. Each breath was measured, each muscle coiled, ready to spring. The despair that had threatened to consume him was now transmuted into pure, unadulterated rage, honed to a razor's edge. They burst from the underground into the rain-slicked streets of Hell's Kitchen. The Mercedes, a black phantom, tore through the narrow alleys, tires squealing in protest. The world outside became a blur of flashing lights, distorted city sounds, and the relentless drumming of rain against the windshield. Enzo, behind the wheel, drove with a controlled recklessness, his gaze fixed on the GPS, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed violently in his temple. He bypassed red lights, ignored honking horns, his focus absolute. Every second was an eternity. Every moment Alara was in Silas's clutches was a twist to the knife in his own gut. The meatpacking plant loomed out of the swirling mist, a hulking, derelict structure that reeked of rust and forgotten lives. Grimy windows stared out like vacant eyes. Enzo slammed the car to a halt 2 blocks away, his men spilling out before the engine died. Perimeter secure, Tony reported, his voice tight. 2 lookouts down. No alarms yet. Good. Enzo's eyes scanned the building, mapping entry points, calculating angles. He moved towards a rusted service door, his men fanning out, shadows dissolving into deeper shadows. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of wet metal, impending violence, and Enzo's simmering fury. The door buckled under Tony's expert kick, splintering inwards with a resounding crack. They surged inside, a wave of disciplined force. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, filled with the ghostly remains of meat hooks and industrial machinery, not just rusting relics. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the drip of water and the soft scuff of their boots. Then, a flicker of movement. A shotgun blast ripped through the air, tearing into the concrete wall near Enzo's head, spraying him with dust and debris. Contact. Tony yelled, returning fire. Enzo didn't flinch. He moved like a dark whirlwind, a blur of motion. His Beretta was in his hand, an extension of his will. He fired twice, precise and lethal, dropping 2 of Silas's men before they even had time to fully raise their weapons. The smell of gunpowder, acrid and metallic, filled the air, mingling with the rain and decay. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Shouts, curses in broken English and Italian, the frantic clatter of spent casings on concrete. Enzo was in his element, a terrifying dance of death he had perfected over decades. He moved through the chaotic ballet of violence with brutal efficiency, his movements economical, devastating. He didn't waste a bullet, didn't hesitate. Each shot found its mark. Each strike was designed to incapacitate, to eliminate. He pushed deeper into the facility, following the faint sounds of a struggle, a muffled cry. His heart pounded a furious drumbeat against his ribs, not with fear, but with an agonizing blend of desperate hope and savage resolve. He would burn this place to the ground if he had to. He would tear Silas limb from limb. He rounded a corner, into a smaller, grimmer room. And there she was, Alara. She was slumped against a filthy concrete wall, her hands still bound, a crude gag around her mouth. Her elegant clothes were torn and smudged with dirt. A crimson streak marred her temple, a stark splash of color against her pale skin. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on something just out of Enzo's view. Tears had carved clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She was alive. Wounded, terrified, but alive. A wave of dizzying relief, so potent it almost buckled his knees, swept through Enzo. It warred with a fresh surge of annihilating fury, cold and absolute. Silas. He had dared. His gaze snapped to Silas, who stood over Alara, a wicked knife glinting in his hand, a triumphant sneer on his face. The dawn arrives, Silas chuckled, his voice raspy. Just in time to see your precious ballerina break. He raised the knife, intending to plunge it into Alara's shoulder, a final, cruel message. Enzo moved. Not with a bullet, but with pure, unadulterated force. He launched himself across the room, a black projectile of righteous wrath. Silas, startled, barely had time to register the dark blur before Enzo was on him, a primal roar tearing from his throat. The knife clattered uselessly to the floor. Enzo slammed Silas against the concrete wall, a sickening crunch echoing in the small room. He didn't bother with words. His hands, like iron vices, closed around Silas's throat, squeezing. Silas clawed at his arms, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging with a dawning horror. Enzo. No. Alara's muffled cry broke through the red haze of his rage. She was struggling against her bonds, her eyes wide with terror, not for herself, but for the man who was moments away from committing murder. Her voice, raw and desperate, pierced through the fog of Enzo's fury. Alara. Her light. He couldn't tarnish it further with this man's blood. His grip remained, unyielding, but the murderous intent momentarily wavered. He loosened his hold just enough for Silas to gasp, a wretched, desperate sound. This isn't over, Enzo rasped, his voice a low, vibrating menace, dangerously close to Silas's ear. You touch her again, you even think about her, and I will ensure you regret the day you were born. Your pain will be legendary." He then slammed Silas's head against the wall one last time, a stunning blow that rendered the man unconscious, slumping him to the floor in a heap. Enzo didn't waste another glance on Silas. His world had shrunk to one singular, precious focus, Alara. He was at her side in an instant, dropping to his knees, his hands, still trembling with residual rage, moving with surprising gentleness to tear away the crude gag. "Alara," he breathed, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and agonizing fear. He saw the bruise on her temple, the raw marks on her wrists, and the fury flared again, colder, more dangerous than before. "Enzo," she whispered, her voice hoarse, tears streaming down her dirty face. Her eyes, still wide with terror, slowly softened, relief washing over them like a balm. The perceived betrayal, the chilling thought of his revenge, evaporated, replaced by the overwhelming, undeniable truth of his ferocious rescue. He swiftly cut her bonds with a hunting knife from his gear, his movements precise, careful not to nick her skin. As her hands were freed, she immediately clutched at his tactical vest, burying her face against his chest, her body shaking uncontrollably. The scent of gunpowder and rain, mingled with his unique cologne, became her anchor, her safe harbor in the storm. Enzo's arms, powerful and absolute, wrapped around her, pulling her close, sheltering her. He felt the delicate tremor of her body against his, the fragile beating of her heart. He gently brushed the hair from her face, his thumb tracing the bruising on her temple. "You're safe," he murmured, the words a fierce, possessive vow. "You're safe now, Mia Ballerina. No one will ever touch you again." He scooped her into his arms, a weightless bundle against his powerful frame, his dark gaze sweeping the room with a chilling promise of retribution. The rescue was complete, but the price of Silas's transgression, Enzo knew, was yet to be fully paid. Alara awoke to a symphony of soft textures and hushed sounds. The scratchy dampness of the concrete floor was replaced by the cool, silken caress of high thread count sheets. The oppressive scent of mildew and decay had vanished, supplanted by the clean, crisp aroma of expensive linen and a faint, familiar hint of Enzo's woody cologne. Sunlight, filtered through heavy velvet drapes, painted the opulent room in muted golds and grays. She was in Enzo's penthouse suite, the very place she had once vowed never to enter without a fight. Her head still throbbed, dull, persistent ache, but the searing pain in her wrists and ankles had receded, replaced by the comforting, cool application of bandages. A blanket impossibly soft was tucked around her chin with an almost paternal tenderness. She blinked, her eyes fluttering open, and found Enzo seated in a leather armchair beside her bed, watching her. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, simply been there. His face, usually a mask of controlled intensity, was etched with a profound weariness. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and the faint stubble on his jaw softened the sharp angles of his face. But his eyes, obsidian pools of unwavering focus, were locked on her, burning with an almost frightening devotion. The ferocity of his rescue, the raw, unleashed fury she had witnessed in Silas's squalid lair, lingered in their depths. Alara. Her name was a low, possessive murmur, a prayer and a claim all at once. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her, and a sharp phantom ache shot through her temple. Enzo was instantly at her side, a strong hand gently pressing her back against the pillows. "Easy, Mia Ballerina," he commanded, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You took a hard fall. Rest." A glass of water, cool and clear, was pressed to her lips. She drank, the liquid a soothing balm to her parched throat. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the dangerous mafia don, but the man who had torn through hell itself to bring her back. The man who sat vigil, silent and unwavering, guarding her fragile sleep. The duality was jarring, terrifying, and profoundly moving. "Silas," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. The memory of his cruel sneer, the glint of the knife, the suffocating fear, it all rushed back, a cold wave of trauma threatening to drown her. Enzo's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. His eyes, fixed on hers, held a chilling promise of retribution. "Silas Vance will no longer trouble you, Alara, or anyone else." His words were calm, devoid of theatricality, yet carried the absolute weight of a death sentence. A shiver ran down Alara's spine, not entirely from fear, but from a dark, unsettling satisfaction. The man who had haunted her dreams, who had tried to destroy her, was gone, erased. And Enzo, her dark savior, was the architect of his demise. Her recovery was a meticulous, unwavering affair, dictated entirely by Enzo. He hovered, a silent, watchful shadow. He brought her nourishing food, fed her gently when her hands still trembled, ensured she had the finest medical care. He read to her from her beloved ballet history books, his deep voice, usually reserved for commands, surprisingly soothing. He rarely left her side, the vastness of his empire seemingly shrinking to the confines of her recovery. One afternoon, a sharp, authoritative voice echoed from Enzo's office, just beyond the closed double doors. It was a rapid-fire burst of Italian, too quick for Alara to follow, but the tone was undeniable, cold, decisive, final. Enzo's attention had been drawn away for a moment, and Alara, resting in the quiet sanctuary of her bedroom, overheard. Later that evening, Enzo returned to her bedside, his face impassive. Silas Vance, he stated, his voice flat, has had his assets seized. His network dismantled. His partners are cooperating. His name has been systematically erased from every record. He is now a ghost, Alara. Worse than dead. Forgotten. Alara's breath hitched. Forgotten, she whispered the word hollow. Enzo's eyes, dark and chilling, met hers. In our world, Alara, sometimes erasure is a far more agonizing fate than a bullet. He will spend his remaining days with nothing, a hollow man, watching his empire crumble, knowing it was because he dared to touch what was mine. The sheer ruthlessness of it, the cold, calculating precision of Enzo's vengeance, was breathtaking. He hadn't just removed Silas, he had utterly destroyed him, ensuring a prolonged, agonizing reckoning that was far more brutal than a swift death. Alara felt a wave of nausea, a profound moral revulsion churning in her stomach. This was the true face of Enzo's world, stark and unforgiving. Yet, beneath the horror, a strange, dark tendril of feeling began to unfurl within her. A sense of perverse justice. Silas had been a monster, and Enzo, her own monster, had devoured him. The conflict raged within her, the artist, repulsed by the brutality, and the woman, undeniably safe, undeniably claimed, by the very force that had wrought such devastation. She remembered the fear, the isolation in that warehouse. The chilling thought that Enzo might have abandoned her, or worse, that he was behind it all. That raw terror now contrasted sharply with the unwavering devotion in his eyes, the meticulous care of his hands. He had risked everything for her. He had unleashed his entire world to reclaim her. Why, she asked one night, her voice barely a whisper as he sat watching the city lights, the silent guardian. Why go to such lengths? For me. He turned, his gaze intense. You are mine, Alara, he simply stated, the words a powerful, unyielding truth. My protection is absolute. My claim, unwavering. What is mine, no one touches, and no one takes. His hand reached out, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. When you were gone, it was like losing Isabella all over again. A darkness I swore I would never feel. I would have burned this city to the ground to bring you back. His confession, raw and vulnerable, struck a chord deep within her. She saw the profound, protective love etched in the depths of his eyes, a dangerous, possessive love that mirrored the very violence he inflicted. He was not merely a criminal. He was a man consumed by the need to protect, shaped by the agony of past loss. Alara reached up, her fingers tentatively tracing the scar above his eyebrow, a silent acknowledgement of the battles he had fought, the darkness he carried. Her heart, once broken and guarded, now beat a complicated, intoxicating rhythm. The trauma still lingered, a phantom ache, but it was interwoven with a profound gratitude, a deepening acceptance, and a dangerous, undeniable love for the man who was both her monster and her savior. She understood now. Her heart was not just protected, it was claimed. Enzo Rossi had not just saved her theater, he had saved her. And in doing so, he had become an inextricable part of her, a shadow woven into her light, a melody in her chaotic symphony. She was no longer just the ballerina, the artist. She was his utterly and completely. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was, she was beginning to want to be. The reckoning was complete. And a new, more dangerous, more profound understanding had bloomed in its bloody wake. A year bloomed and faded in the vibrant pulse of Manhattan, and with it, the velvet curtain underwent a metamorphosis. No longer a decaying relic whispering of past glories, it was a living, breathing testament to enduring art and, perhaps, to an unlikely, dangerous patronage. The peeling gold leaf on the proscenium arch gleamed anew, restored to its former splendor. The velvet seats, once moth-eaten and sparse, were plush, vibrant crimson, inviting. Laughter and the rhythmic tap of ballet shoes now echoed through corridors once thick with the scent of despair. Alara's artistic vision, freed from the suffocating weight of debt and threat, bloomed with a fierce, almost blinding brilliance. Her new ballets, infused with raw emotion and innovative choreography, drew critical acclaim. The theater buzzed with life, packed houses, eager students, and community outreach programs, the excited chatter of children during morning classes. The scent of fresh flowers in the lobby, a detail Enzo had insisted upon, mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of rosin and old wood. Enzo's hand in this rebirth was, as always, discreet but absolute. Funds materialized seamlessly. Security, a silent, almost invisible shield, ensured no shadow of Silas's past network dared to linger. He still maintained his office adjacent to the theater, a stark contrast of dark wood and gleaming steel against the Baroque elegance. From there, he managed his world, but his gaze, Alara knew, was always subtly fixed on hers. Their daily life was a paradox, a delicate, dangerous pas de deux. Alara, no longer the terrified ballerina, moved with a newfound confidence, her spirit resilient, her art her shield. She challenged him, debated his methods, and sometimes, with a subtle, defiant glint in her emerald eyes, she even defied him. He, in turn, remained the formidable Don, ruthless in his world, yet startlingly tender with her. He would still appear unexpectedly in the wings, his presence a silent declaration of ownership, a tangible anchor in her sometimes ethereal world. He'd watch her dance, his dark eyes softening, rare, almost vulnerable pride blooming in their depths. One quiet evening, after a particularly triumphant premiere, they found themselves alone on the darkened stage. The final strains of applause still hummed in the air, a phantom symphony. Alara, exhilarated and exhausted, spun once more, a ghost of her final bow. Enzo stood in the very spot she had fallen that fateful night a year ago. "It's magnificent, Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the vast space. "What you've built." She turned to him, a soft smile gracing her lips. "What we've built, Enzo." She knew the truth. This masterpiece, thriving under the golden glow of the stage lights, was a testament to their improbable union. He walked towards her, his movements deliberate, commanding. The single work light caught the subtle gleam of a velvet box in his hand. Alara's breath hitched. Her heart, which had faced down kidnappers and moral quandaries, suddenly hammered with a nervous, breathless anticipation. He knelt, not with a theatrical flourish, but with a quiet, profound solemnity that stole the air from her lungs. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, held a vulnerability she rarely witnessed, a deep, unwavering love that shone with almost unbearable intensity. "Alara Vance," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "my ballerina, my light, my everything." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a ring, not ostentatious but exquisitely crafted, a delicate platinum band entwined around a single, flawless diamond, its brilliance mirroring the light in her own eyes. "You came crashing into my world, broken and bleeding, and you showed me a different kind of strength, different kind of beauty. You brought light to shadows I thought were eternal. You made me human again." He paused, a muscle ticking in his jaw, as if summoning every ounce of courage. "My world is dangerous. It will always be. But my heart, Alara, belongs to you. Always. Will you do me the honor, Miyakara, of becoming my wife? Of dancing this eternal, dangerous dance with me?" Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down Alara's face. A kaleidoscope of memories flashed through her mind. The cold concrete, the fear, the violent rescue, the unsettling honesty, the slow, insidious unraveling of her defenses. This man, a king of shadows, was offering her not just a ring, but a future forged in fire and velvet. A future that blended her artistic light with his protective, dangerous shadow. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, the single word of profound, absolute surrender. "Yes, Enzo. 1,000 times, yes." He rose, slipping the ring onto her trembling finger. It fit perfectly, a symbol of their unbreakable, impossible bond. Then he pulled her into his arms, a kiss that tasted of salt and promises, of danger and undeniable love. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of an eternal dance. Their wedding, 3 months later, was a private affair held right there, on the stage of the Velvet Curtain. The theater, once a symbol of their struggle, now became the cradle of their new beginning. The few guests were a motley crew: loyal dancers, a handful of trusted and suitably intimidated city officials, Enzo's core enforcers, and a few of his more unconventional associates, all mingling awkwardly but respectfully. Enzo, in a custom-tailored white suit that somehow still managed to exude menace, looked at Alara with an intensity that promised forever. The velvet curtain thrived, not just as a beacon of high art, but as a vibrant community hub. Under Alara's guidance and Enzo's quiet support, ballet classes for underprivileged children filled the studio, their laughter echoing through the halls. Local artists found a space to exhibit their work, their dreams nurtured by the very empire that had once seemed so dark. Alara and Enzo, the ballerina and the Don, built the unique kind of family, a testament to the belief that even from the deepest shadows, light could be forged. They knew the dangers hadn't vanished. The echoes of Enzo's world, the whispers of betrayal and violence, would always linger at the edges of their gilded cage. But now they faced it together. Alara, no longer broken, but whole and fiercely loved, held Enzo's hand, his calloused palm a familiar, comforting weight. Their love story, forged in fire and illuminated by the fading spotlight of an old theater, was an eternal dance, passionate, dangerous, and irrevocably, beautifully theirs. The curtain had fallen on despair, but it had risen on a new, exhilarating act, a masterpiece written by two souls bound by destiny, darkness, and an unbreakable love. Even in the deepest shadows, can true light be found? Alara, a broken artist clinging to the last echoes of her family's legacy, believed her fate was sealed. Yet, when a ruthless mafia don saw her fall, he didn't just save her. He claimed her. His world, built on violence and unbreakable loyalty, became her gilded cage. But what if the fiercest protector is also the one who understands your deepest wounds? What if his possessive love is the only thing that can truly heal the parts of you that shattered long ago? This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting alone, but in allowing ourselves to be truly seen, truly cherished, even by a love forged in darkness. Your past pain does not define your future worth. You are not just the sum of your scars, but the resilient spirit that survived them. If Alara's journey from despair to a dangerous, undeniable love resonated deep within your soul, then you belong here. Join our community of dreamers and survivors who believe in fierce love and unwavering hope. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal and captivate, and tell us in the comments, what does true protection mean to you?